safe thus far, and grace will lead us home.
Just some of the sights and sounds as we look at the skyline of New York City that has been changed so dramatically. That is the scene where the smoke is still rising from the wreckage of the collapse of the Twin Towers there on Tuesday, and the Pentagon.
The Pentagon picture is just as jolting as you see that gaping hole in the southwest side of the building, and work continues there to try to return to some sense of normalcy and try to get back to what can be a real reach for a normal workday.
That's
there.
right. And the bad news yesterday is they do not expect to find any more survivors out of that wreckage. Those who might have survived the impact of that airplane certainly did not survive the fire that ensued. That fire finally under control, and the rebuilding process can now go forward. And later on we'll show you that wonderful shot of the American flag standing by.
Been draped on one of the sides.
Draped on one of the sides of the
Pentagon.
Pentagon.
That is a good shot. We'll get to that.
It's hard to believe that it has been nearly 46 hours since the nation first learned that it was under a terrorist attack, and that realization of just what exactly that means is still growing, and certainly what the military response, if any, might be.
You know, it's difficult enough for us as journalists. It's difficult for adults to grasp everything that has happened, our great loss, but victims of families who face the wrenching task of trying to explain to their children just what has happened to their loved ones.
They asked if he was in heaven, and I said yes. And of course they were crying. And after the tears cleared, they asked if they could call him on his cell phone.
Well, Tom Burnett was among a group of passengers that apparently tried to foil the terrorist plot on United Flight 93, a very heroic act. The plane crashed in a rural Pennsylvania field.
Yeah, we are just beginning to learn that from cell phone calls made from these flights. That call saying that some of the male passengers had decided to get together and try to overtake the terrorists, and that is the last that some of their family members heard from them. So we will hear more about those heroic acts. In the meantime, we've got some other pictures to show you. These from outer space. Orbiting satellites and the International Space Station's three-man crew caught a frightening view of the destruction. There you see it from space, from 240 miles up. The crew got this view of lower Manhattan before the horrific attacks, and then suddenly compare this now, the smoldering ruins and the New York skyline without its 28-year-old landmark towers.
But back down to earth and the scene from the destruction on lower Manhattan, and we go back again to our colleague Garrick Utley, who is with us in New York. He's been up for much of the night. Garrick, again, you'll see the sunrise from your vantage point, and there's much to ponder here as it seems like this day we start the grieving process. It seemed like it was anger and then shock, and now many people are into this grief mode.
And indeed, a mixture of grief and anger and anxiety and perhaps even fear as to what's going to come next. But a moment ago, Vince and Carol, you were showing that scene from the satellite of lower Manhattan, the World Trade Center there, and then suddenly gone, no longer there. And over my shoulder right here, you can see the plume of smoke, which has been there ever since those buildings collapsed. But something strange has happened this morning as the sun indeed is coming up, or the light is coming up over the east side of Manhattan, if not yet the sun. That plume of smoke is circling all the way around. The wind has shifted around the southern end of the island, over my right shoulder. You may not be able to see it, and all the way up here, the east side. It's as if a shroud now is being wrapped around Manhattan Island. Again, nearly 48 hours after those two planes struck the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center. Well, as the new day starts this Thursday, the papers are out, and no surprise as to what they're offering the 7 million people plus in New York City. This is the New York Times, again, a banner headline about the stunned rescuers working, the FBI tracking the hijackers' movements and wondering what's going to happen next. In the New York Daily News, well, in bleak headlines, red letters, 10,000 feared dead. and scenes of the rubble and the rescue workers. And finally, the city's other tabloid, the New York Post, if I can control the wind right here, it doesn't have a headline. How about that? No headline.
I might have a headline for you right here, Garrick.
It does have a picture, there you go, a picture of the American flag being raised there, 3 firemen down at the site of the disaster, and the quote, "gave proof through the night that our flag was still there," and indeed it is. Also down there in Lower Manhattan is Alessio Vinci, who's standing by to give us the latest on the rescue efforts. Good morning, Alessio.
Well, good morning, Garrick. Well, we've seen that picture from space of the big thick cloud of smoke still raising from the debris, and we can provide you a picture closer up here. The debris, the cloud. I'm going to try to get out of the way here. The big thick cloud here. Provoked by still smoldering metal and iron, and we have seen some pocket of fire. I think the camera can zero in here a little bit, tilting up the camera a little bit. There's a little bit of fire here and there. Obviously nothing compared to what the scene was here 24 hours ago, but still, as you can see from these pictures, not only there is still a lot of smoke, but also a few pockets of fires, and this of course making the work of the rescue officials, the rescue workers difficult and indeed very dangerous, because of course it is extremely hot there still. It is still very difficult to work in that kind of environment. They have to use gas masks, and of course the buildings all around there is also very unstable. We have seen several refrigerator trucks getting closer to the area there. Obviously those refrigerator trucks will be used to take some of the body parts and the bodies back to the morgue.
Alessio, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt. This is Vince Cellini in Atlanta at our studios. We do want to pass this along and get back to you that we understand that after the FAA shutdown of a couple of days ago, the airports are opening around New York. Kennedy, LaGuardia, and Newark open on a limited basis for travel. So that is a positive news as we try to regroup from this. And now I will return to you, Alessio. So Thank you. Pardon my interruption for that news.
Not at all, Vince. On that note, we actually heard a couple of jets, military jets, flying overhead here several hours ago. So certainly now we're going to perhaps start hearing a couple of commercial jets flying back into JFK and LaGuardia airports. I was just telling you that we have seen earlier on some refrigerator trucks and also some dumpster trucks that were brought into the area. Obviously, the refrigerator trucks to bring some of the body parts and the bodies back to the morgues, and the dumpster truck to remove, so far we understand, more than 3,000 tons of debris that have been already collected on site and be brought away from the site to make some more room for the rescue operation. The mayor of New York, Ralph Giuliani, asked the Federal Emergency Management Agency to deliver 6,000 body bags. This means that despite that the official count, the last official count, has 82 people dead, and 16 of those 16 have been identified, they do expect more people once the rescue operation continues, well, now entering into its second day in about a few hours. Back to you, Garrick.
Mentioned the airports will be opening on a limited basis. That means that those planes which were headed towards Kennedy or LaGuardia or Newark on Tuesday morning when the terrorists struck and were diverted, most of them to Canada, especially the international flights, those passengers have been waiting up there in Canada unless they decide to come down in a rental car or by train. And now those passengers and only those flights will be allowed to come into the New York airport starting this morning. It's not expected to be later in the day or indeed tomorrow until further air traffic is allowed into the New York City area. Otherwise, schools will be open, museums are open, Times Square is going to be filled because the Broadway shows are open. Life will be getting back to as nearly normal as it can be, considering what's happening down there at the foot of Manhattan Island. Vincent Carroll.
All right, thank you very much, Garrick Utley, as we are slowly creeping back to some signs of normalcy. But first this, national correspondent Gary Tuckman has gone where police and firefighters, doctors and nurses and emergency people, only they have gone, into the heart of this terrorist attack there in New York City. Watch this report.
I have to tell you, first of all, there are no cameras allowed at Ground Zero. And to be frank, I'm not sure reporters are allowed at Ground Zero either. However, a very kind soul, a medical professional, decided to take me along to the site, wanted me to see it, wanted me to be able to tell America and the world about what happened because she just thought it was so horrible. And I have to tell you something. This is much, much, much worse than I possibly would have imagined, and we've been here for 2 days now, just 4 blocks away. You can't tell how bad it is until you're right on the site. And let me tell you, first of all, what I saw. There are at least 10 blocks in each direction of heavy damage. It's not just the World Trade Center complex. It is hundreds of other businesses that have been heavily destroyed, moderately destroyed, or slightly destroyed. Some of the businesses that have been destroyed are Burger King, a well-known department store next to the World Trade Center called Century 21. J&R Music World is a well-known record store and computer store and electronics store that has some damage. For blocks and blocks, about a half a mile from north to south, there is heavy debris in the streets. There are cars tipped over, trucks tipped over, just lying in the streets. It reminds me of a ride at Universal Studios called Earthquake. And when you go on the Earthquake ride, everything flips over and things catch fire and there's debris and there's sand, and that's what it looked like to me when I got there.
Obviously a big task ahead for those rescuers in New York and also in Washington, trying to find any survivors in the Pentagon. Dave Hannon, though, has a forecast here that I think these rescue workers are not going to like.
Yeah, it's not the best of forecasts. Weather certainly has not been a factor thus far, but we are looking at the threat for some showers beginning later on tonight. So not a bad day today in New York and in Washington weather-wise. Let's show you what's going on. We take a look at the radar first of all, and there is a strong cold front working its way towards the East Coast. This is going to cool the temperatures off. It's rather warm. Temperatures have been in the 80s. They will return by later on tonight and into tomorrow to much cooler readings. Here is the forecast for New York City. We are looking at mostly sunny conditions today. A forecast high is in the low 80s, and then showers move in most likely after midnight tonight. We're talking about rainfall amounts generally about 1/4 to 1/2 inch, with overnight lows into the 60s, and then much cooler tomorrow. And after some morning showers, the sunshine will return. A forecast high of about 66. Much the same forecast for Washington, D.C. Better chances for rain the further north you go, so that rain chances are better in New York City than they are in Washington. But we will see some scattered showers, we think, overnight tonight, with forecast lows of 62, and then cooler in Washington tomorrow. Forecast highs there into the upper 60s. So weather may very well indeed play a role later on tonight, especially from midnight to about 6 in the morning, the best chances for rain in New York.
Wow. Difficult hours anyway.
Yeah,
nonetheless.
the search operation is continuing 24/7 at this point.
Right.
So
I guess if there's any good news, it is going to be cooler. That certainly is help to rescuers. Beginning tomorrow, temperatures back into the 60s.
all right, thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
Well, in the meantime, we're going to show you this shot that we talked about earlier. There it is, the American flag draped over the side of the Pentagon, just off to the side from where a jetliner crashed in to this military nerve center of the United States. Just one symbolic show of support for the rescue operations going there, and what we are increasingly seeing as the undying spirit of the American people as Washington and our nation's leaders try to consider what sort of response is necessary to these terrorist attacks. In fact, that it will be a big day at the White House today. President Bush and his advisors are pressing Congress for billions of dollars for cleanup as well as for this investigation. In fact, they're talking about as much as $20 billion. CNN White House correspondent Kelly Wallace joins us with more on that. Hi, Kelly.
Hi again, Carol. That's exactly right. In fact, lawmakers likely to get an emergency spending bill up to about $20 billion, as you noted, to the president's desk as early as this afternoon. This would basically authorize the U.S. to go ahead and spend that money for search and rescue efforts, for rebuilding operations, and, of course, for the investigation and any counterterrorism efforts. Now, the second part of what you mentioned, we do know negotiations underway between White House officials and lawmakers over what would be a congressional resolution basically authorizing the U.S. to retaliate for those terrorist attacks. We know negotiations continued well into the night last night, likely to continue today. The big sticking point is really over the wording of this resolution, because while lawmakers of both parties definitely believe the U.S. should respond and certainly hold those deemed responsible accountable, there is a concern on the part of some lawmakers about any resolution, in essence, giving the president a blank check for military action. Now, as for some developments to report, we did see lawmakers turn out Wednesday evening for a prayer vigil. Lawmakers of both parties getting together to reflect on the tragedy that has hit many cities in the entire country and to come together. And then, of course, we did see the president heading over to the Pentagon yesterday, late yesterday afternoon. The president saying he was really overwhelmed by the devastation there. The president also noting that while he may be sad about what he is seeing and angry, that the U.S. will not be cowed by terrorism. Now, a couple of other things we did learn. White House saying that the plane that actually hit the Pentagon, the White House having real and credible information, in its words, that the intended target for that plane was the White House. The White House also saying it has credible information that Air Force One was an intended target, and that the White House hoping to put to rest any questions and criticisms about why President Bush went from Sarasota, Florida to 2 military bases, one in Louisiana and then in Nebraska, before eventually coming back to Washington late on Tuesday evening. Now, as for President Bush likely to be meeting with his national security team again on this day, we have seen the president stepping up the rhetoric a bit, saying that these acts were more than acts of terror, but acts of war. The president working the phones, reaching out to world leaders, trying to build what the administration is calling an international coalition against terrorism, not unlike perhaps the coalition his father tried to build during the Persian Gulf War in 1991. The U.S. also somewhat gratified, or very gratified, by the statement by NATO on Wednesday, NATO saying that an attack on one member of the alliance amounts to an attack on the entire alliance. Now, U.S. officials, Carol, not speculating on what kind of military response or what kind of response the U.S. will take, but clearly White House trying to build international support for any step it will take. Carol, back to you.
Sure. And Kelly, more and more Pakistan is becoming the focus of many of these discussions. A few minutes ago, we heard from Tom Mentir reporting from Islamabad about the meeting between the United States ambassador and Pakistan's military leadership. It seems that the signal being sent is that Pakistan might be willing to allow the United States or NATO forces to use Pakistani air to fly through their airspace. Is the Bush administration likely to ask Pakistan to be able to stage military operations from their border with Afghanistan? Should the Taliban, should Osama bin Laden be definitively identified as responsible for these terrorist attacks?
Well, Carol, a lot of questions there, of course. Certainly, I heard Tom's report and definitely want to get some reaction to that, but have not been able to from the National Security Council staff just yet. You know, the White House and the U.S. officials certainly won't be talking about any kind of pre-steps that the military or the administration will take before the administration launches any retaliation. But certainly it will be heartened to hear that message from the Pakistani government. We do know that U.S. State Department officials, I believe, have been talking to Pakistani officials as recently as yesterday. So this is something the administration clearly is probably talking to through diplomatic channels. Carol.
All right. Thank you very much. Kelly Wallace, very early on the White House lawn. Vince?
Upon touring the Pentagon on Wednesday, President Bush described himself as, quote, overwhelmed by the devastation, and we are going to go there and check in with the Pentagon right now on our CNN national correspondent, Bob Franken, who picks up our coverage and the recovery efforts there. Bob?
And Vince, it's easy to be overwhelmed. Of course, the sight behind me of that gash, that massive gash in the wall of the Pentagon where the plane collided is enough. But now becomes the tragic story, the tragic loss of life. And we saw as the day went on yesterday that the officials were able to get to some of the bodies that were inside and to remove them by stretcher. We were given no figures. We have been given no figures about the number of casualties who have been taken out already, nor have we been given any figures on estimates how many, in fact, will have lost their lives in this attack on the Pentagon. We are told that it's going to be far short of some of the estimates that went into the figures near 800. We were told by the Pentagon that there are about 150 who are unaccounted for here, not including those 64 who are on the plane. As a matter of fact, estimates that you get that are unofficial place the final casualty count here at about 200. And while that very grim work was going on inside the Pentagon, there was also the work of keeping the military going and the work of planning for retaliation, among other things. The Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, told armed forces overseas in a message he sent that there could be military action ahead.
It is my duty as head of this department to tell you that more, much more, will be asked of you in the weeks and months ahead. This is especially true of those who are in the field. We face powerful and terrible enemies, enemies we intend to vanquish, so that moments of horror, like yesterday, will be stopped.
All the people who work at the Pentagon are expected back to work today. About half of them were brought in yesterday. All are expected to show up. They'll be assigned, if they cannot get to their offices for the obvious reason, assigned to other facilities while the military gets back up to full operation here and full speed as it plans probably as its primary objective, Vince, retaliation against those responsible for this.
All right, thank you very much, Bob Franken, reporting live to us from the Pentagon. Well, like most of us, you also have questions about the attack. Log on to our homepage and email us your questions, and then watch our coverage. We will ask the experts on the air. The only thing you need to remember is CNN.com. Why has Osama bin Laden been at the top of the list of suspects in Tuesday's attack? Our guest now may have some answers. He is Simon Reeve, authored the book The New Jackals, Ramzi Youssef, Osama bin Laden, and the Future of Terrorism, and he joins us now from London. Good morning, Mr. Reeve.
Good morning.
You have studied bin Laden. In your expert opinion, is this his signature, this attack? Is he at the forefront of this attack?
Well, it's early days still, but I think he is at the top of a very short list of likely perpetrators. If it's not ordered by him, then it's quite likely to have been inspired by him.
As you've studied him, what can you tell us about him that we don't know? Take us to the core of Osama bin Laden.
Well, I think the crucial period in his life was the 1980s, when he fought for 10 years against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. He fought in some horrendous battles, and I think that's given him a sense of fearlessness. It's militarized him. It's turned him into a man who is prepared to use overwhelming force in pursuit of his objectives.
Well, he cannot act alone. Perhaps you can tell us about who might be shoulder to shoulder with him, about his soldiers, his lieutenants, and this army that he seems to have assembled.
Well, several of his men seem to come from North Africa, particularly from Algeria. They form the core of his group. He also has other followers from the Middle East, from Europe, from America, from across the Muslim and from across the Muslim world. They're absolutely devoted to him. They do view him as their leader, but he is one of several leaders of a broad group. It's a loose-knit group. It's an umbrella group for various organizations who are battling for widely differing aims, from bringing down the government in Egypt to bringing down the government in Algeria to, of course, launching attacks against America because of its support for regimes in the Middle East and for its support for Israel.
Yeah, Mr. Reeve, I imagine he becomes that much more dangerous because he has the financial wherewithal to do things on a very broad scope.
He does indeed, but I think it's something of a mistake to make him out to be a billionaire or something like that. He certainly did inherit a large sum of money when his father died. His father was a major businessman in the Middle East. The Bin Laden construction company, which he founded, helped to rebuild Kuwait after the end of the war there. It rebuilt Beirut after the conflict there. And Osama bin Laden certainly did inherit a large sum of money. How much of that he still has, I think, is open to question. And I think it's also open to question how easily he can access that money. What is not in doubt, however, is that there is still money funding his group, and that money is coming out largely from the Middle East, from supporters of bin Laden's aims.
You call him one of the new breed of terrorists. Can you expand on that a little bit? What about this new breed? What makes them even more dangerous?
Well, I think in the past, terrorists have tended to have some sort of political goal, however unreasonable it might seem. And I think the fear now is that terrorists are prepared to inflict mass casualties in pursuit of aims that aren't easy to define. I mean, bin Laden's aim seems to be to attack America, to drive it out of the Middle East, but generally just to assault America in the hope that American support for countries in the Middle East like Saudi Arabia will wither away. But he's never really explained why he's gone after America. It seems to be some sort of anger at America, but also he feels betrayed by America. And he turned against America at the end of the Afghan conflict when America tried to persuade him and other Afghan rebel fighters to start talking to people they'd previously been fighting. So there's several causes of his anger, not just an anger at Israel, it's anger at Saudi Arabia, it's anger at American support for regimes in the Middle East, but it's also he feels betrayed by them. He's a former asset of America that has turned against his former sponsors.
Well, Simon Reeve, thank you very much for your insights. We appreciate your time this morning from London. Thank you.
My pleasure.
It's just a few seconds ago you reported that all 3 New York airports are reopening. We want to show you a live picture of LaGuardia International Airport right now, where people are already beginning to line up. And while you're watching this, I want to let you know that we just got this in from the Associated Press, that out of Hamburg, Germany, police have detained one man in this northern city in Germany. He was detained for questioning as part of an investigation, according to the state police chief there. He refused to give the man's name, age, or nationality. It is simply that they want to question him because, quote, he had a profession that appears to be very interesting to us, but state police there declined to give any further details. Obviously, people asking questions internationally about any potential connections or suspects or information that may lead to who is responsible for these terrorist attacks on the United States. Also, I'm looking through this wire here right now. It says that earlier investigators were working under tight security as they combed through several apartment buildings in Hamburg looking for any evidence connected to 2 men believed linked to Tuesday's attacks. So once again, German state police are questioning a man in Hamburg this morning. As soon as we get more information on this, we will let you know. In the meantime, there you're seeing the damage to the Pentagon as rescue workers now say that they do not expect to find any more people alive in the Pentagon building. The good news, if you could call it that, is that they were speculating that more than 200 people were killed at the Pentagon, but that number has declined significantly. And the FBI will be hand-sifting through evidence at the scene today. It is far from normal, though, off the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States. Navy ships are patrolling. F-16s are still flying overhead in New York City protectively. New York and Washington are still in a high state of alert, and some 40,000 National Guards officers. These are domestic officers, civilians who are trained in military tactics to help in a national emergency. They have been dispatched. So once again, far from normal as the cleanup and rescue operations continue. In the meantime, the hijackers, more on this investigation here, the hijackers may have had links to Middle Eastern countries. And in this country, Arab American, Muslim, and Sikh leaders, among others, are reporting sporadic vandalism and assaults. CNN's Thelma Gutierrez found that many Arab Americans believe that a backlash against them is now growing.
Serene Sawaf is a 21-year-old university student. She is Muslim. She fears her scarf may make her a target.
Women receiving threats, take off your scarf or else we'll shoot you and go back to your country, and just awful, awful remarks.
This guy's cool. Samir, Adam, and Ali were born in California. It is home. Today, they play indoors.
I am afraid that they might start being mean to Muslims like they did 200 years ago to black people.
Tamina Tanir and Fidi Hakim couldn't take their kids to school. The school was closed down for security reasons.
My children go to a Muslim school, and I'm scared for their security.
It's a terrible way to live, they say. After all, they are Americans, Arab Americans.
I feel 100% American. I've been raised here.
I'm really angry too, because you have to understand that even though I'm Muslim, I am American, and I cannot stand it that they did this. I cannot see how there could be any good in bombing the World Trade Center and hurting so many innocent people.
But Islamic centers in many cities are reporting the backlash is starting.
We received reports from New York City of people getting pulled out of their taxi cabs who looked Arab, and they were beaten up, and children who were beaten up.
The terrorist attacks in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania were denounced by Muslim countries throughout the world, including Iran, Libya, and Jordan. In Afghanistan, Taliban leaders accused of harboring terrorists condemned the attacks. So did Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat.
We are completely shocked, completely shocked.
In Texas, 2 mosques were vandalized, their windows either shot out or broken. In San Francisco, California, blood was poured on the sidewalk of an Islamic community center.
I'm blown away because I'd expect that people realize that this is not American. This is completely un-American.
Adam says he hopes people will not confuse him with the bad guys.
I'm just going to try to show that I'm kind and I'm innocent and I'm just a good person.
Thelma Gutierrez, CNN, Los Angeles.
I want to clarify what I was reporting out of Hamburg, Germany. I know more now about the situation there. It seems that the search for suspects, of course, is around the world right now. A man is being detained in Hamburg, Germany for questioning by state police there, and this is the reason why. It appears that police in Hamburg, Germany think that he may have a connection with 2 people who are suspects, possibly the pilots of 2 of the planes which flew into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. It appears that he may have had a connection with these 2 students who were taking flight lessons in Florida at Huffman Aviation Flight School. This man they're questioning in Hamburg, Germany, may have known them because apparently these 2 students for a time had lived in Germany as early as July of 2000. So once again, state police in Hamburg, Germany, questioning a man who may have actually known 2 of the suspects. Vince?
All right, thanks, Carol. Through flight information and reports of cell phone calls, CNN has been able to piece together some of what happened during those fateful flights on Tuesday. CNN's Miles O'Brien brings us what we know so far.
Nothing seemed amiss when American Airlines Flight 11 left the runway in Boston Tuesday morning. The 767-200 was about half full, toting 81 passengers, a cockpit crew of 2, and 9 flight attendants to the opposite coast. The captain likely planned for a 5-hour flight, so there was roughly 8,500 gallons of jet fuel in its 3 tanks. FAA radars tracked the airliner as it followed the flight plan. But then, about 20 minutes into the flight, somewhere over upstate New York, it turned sharply to the south. Flight 11 was hijacked, apparently by knife-wielding men. Airline pilots are trained to handle such situations by keeping calm, complying with requests, and, if possible, dialing in an emergency 4-digit code on a device called a transponder. It transmits crucial flight data to air traffic controllers. The action takes seconds, but it appears no such code was entered. But in the cabin, a frantic flight attendant managed to use a phone to call American Airlines Command Center in Dallas. She reported the trouble. A pilot apparently keyed the microphone, transmitting a cockpit conversation. The hijackers could be heard saying, "We have more planes, we have more planes." Radio transmissions like this would have been recorded on the ground by the FAA.
The police have identified 5 suspects that they believe were involved with this terrorist act, and 2 of whom may be brothers, apparently, reportedly. 2 others may have flown in from Portland and originated in Canada.
About 5 minutes before Flight 11 started heading south, another 767, United Flight 175, left Boston, also for Los Angeles, 65 souls aboard. 15 minutes after becoming airborne, it veered off course. One passenger made 2 calls to his father. In one exchange, he said a flight attendant was stabbed. In the second call, he told his dad the plane was going down.
They knew not to carry guns on the airplane. If they fired off a bullet, they could have had explosive decompression on the aircraft. They knew what they were doing, and they knew what their mission was, obviously.
We know what happened next. The 767 struck and ultimately leveled the World Trade Center's twin towers.
I know pilots. No, if you're going to die, you're not going to fly in a World Trade Center to do it. Yeah, there would be a struggle, major struggle.
By 8:20, the third hijacked flight, American Flight 77, a 757, left Dulles Airport outside Washington, again bound for Los Angeles with 66 people on board. Radar tracking information on this flight obtained by CNN seems to indicate the transponder was turned off, which would have made it tougher to see on radar. We do know this. An hour and 20 minutes after departure, it plowed into the Pentagon. On board was Barbara Olson, a well-known attorney and frequent CNN legal commentator. Huddled in the back of the plane, Olson called her husband twice from her cell phone. She described the frantic scene.
She said that they were armed with knives and box cutters, cardboard cutters.
Even as the focus shifted to the nation's capital, a fourth plane, United Airlines Flight 93, bound for San Francisco out of Newark, takes a sudden 180-degree turn near Cleveland. More than one of the 38 passengers called their families to offer final goodbyes.
He said, I want you to know I love you very much, and I'm calling you from the plane. We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb. And then the phone went dead.
Miles O'Brien, CNN.
All right, a quick look now, a live picture of the United States Capitol, where a prayer vigil took place last night in the center rotunda of the Capitol, the sun rising on yet another day as Congress is being asked by President Bush to consider a resolution of force for an international audience. That is one of the first steps towards a military action should one be necessary in retaliation for these terrorist attacks. Also, Congress being asked for an emergency spending bill of some $20 billion estimated it will take to help rebuild as well as investigate this crime scene.
Also, the sunrise coming over lower Manhattan now, and what is the scene of the wreckage of the towers of the World Trade Center, and at last official account, 82 dead, 16 of them have been identified. A spokesman for the New York City Medical Examiner said it has about 5,000 body bags in stock, ordered another 5,000 to be delivered on Thursday. So that is grim news.
Dogs and listening devices out listening for voices or tapping. Much less noise, though, coming from inside the wreckage. So there is the fear that there could be still 6,000 body bags brought out by the Federal Emergency Management Agency in anticipation of what they're going to find.
Yeah, what they're finding now is a real horror, no question.
Very tough situation out there. Far from normal in New York City or Washington yet. But right now we turn to Bob Franken, who is standing outside the Pentagon with a view of the damage as well as the investigation going on there. Morning, Bob.
Good morning, and with the break of day, as you can see in back of me at the Pentagon, rescue workers are going to try and continue their grim task, trying to get into some of the areas that have proven difficult because the obvious reason, of course, is that huge slab that's leaning after the collision with the airplane a couple of days ago. Officials have already begun the work of bringing out some of the bodies on stretchers. The search continues. We do not have any official count on how many have been brought out, nor do we yet have a casualty estimate, although officials are now suggesting it's going to be in the 100 to 200 person range. They point out that there are about 150 who are Pentagon workers who are unaccounted for, and of course there were the 64 on the airplane. But no official figures yet, just a process continuing. Now there is a sense of normalcy they're trying to achieve here, if you can call it normalcy. All Pentagon workers are supposed to return at 8 a.m. Eastern, in other words, in a little less than an hour and a half to return to the Pentagon. Those who don't have offices, of course, and there are going to be any number of those, will be reassigned to other facilities. So they're trying to get back to that normalcy, if you can call it that, as I said. Also, the normal business of planning military operations, the foremost one being the retaliation that they're going to come up with, the organized retaliation, military action in all probability, once they can decide who will be the target. Carol?
Thank you very much. Bob Franken reporting live outside the Pentagon. A lot of grieving still going on in anticipation of what they're going to find there.
Well, we love that positive. They have the shot of the flag being draped over the wall, and we've kind of been clinging to that this morning as a real symbol of the bounce back. So.
That's right. That's right. And every single employee at the Pentagon to report to work today.
About half that building functional now, but they're getting back to business as usual, as close as possible. Well, families of the victims in Tuesday's attack are beginning yet another day, watching, waiting. Many still have no confirmation of what happened to their loved ones. CNN's Sheila Cast introduces us to one woman who's taken up a vigil at the crash site.
Tracy Rowenhorst stands vigil as close as she can to the spot where the jet slammed into the Pentagon. She looks for any movement, any relevant detail. On Tuesday, her husband Edward, an accountant for the Army, was working near that spot.
I feel I need to be here with him. If he's alive, then he'll definitely need me when he comes out.
It is a frustrating but not lonely vigil. Eddie's parents and the best friends and neighbors who knew him even before he married Tracy 10 years and 2 kids ago keep each other's hopes up with wisecracks and jokes. That's what Eddie would do if he were with them, they say.
I'm trying to be incredibly focused. If I don't, then I would be hysterical. And right now I don't need to be there. I need to be here, watching, waiting.
Officials say the best prospects for finding survivors are at the edges of the impact zone, where the smoke and the heat may not have been as intense. The husband of one who has survived keeps his own vigil at a hospital across town.
You can still see smoke wafting up from the Pentagon.
As soon as the first pictures flashed onto television, even though it was only Louise Kurtz's second day on the job, her husband Michael started to worry. Hours later, the hospital phoned.
I came in teary-eyed. I didn't recognize my wife of 31 years. She's doing better. She's got 70% burns on her body.
Back at what Tracy Rowenhorst calls ground zero, touched by an occasional prayer, she intends to keep her vigil.
We're just sitting in limbo until they start bringing bodies out, I guess. Either way, dead or alive. And we'll be here until the very... If he's the last one out, we'll be here until he comes out.
Sheila Cast for CNN, Washington.
All the while we've been saying that, rather the United States officials have been saying, and we have been reporting that there were no credible warnings early on to let the U.S. forces or even the American people know that anything like this could happen on U.S. soil. Well, according to the editor-in-chief of a London-based Arab daily newspaper, there was a warning several weeks prior. We go now to London, where we are going to be speaking with Abdel Bari Atwan. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, I just want to make sure I had the signal there to London. Let me ask you this. According to your newspaper, you are reporting that Osama bin Laden warned as much as 3 weeks ago that his followers would carry out an unprecedented and massive attack on the United States. Could you elaborate on this? What were the circumstances of this claim?
Actually, this kind of warning is routinic. We, it's endless of telephone calls we receive every day, and I believe also other Arab newspaper and satellite channel received warning before. So it is. We don't know whether it's this kind of thing is accurate or not. So and we publish this warning every time. So, but we don't have actually any information to add to this simply because there wasn't any.
All right, that's a little confusing to us because by American standards, we typically don't go to publication with something that we are in doubt of. So let me start from the very beginning. Who was it who said that Osama bin Laden had warned? Did Osama bin Laden call someone from your newspaper? Did you interview Osama bin Laden and were these claims made by him?
I did interview him 5 years ago, and Osama bin Laden doesn't phone. He doesn't use the phone because he knows that there are a lot of intelligence services detecting his phone, monitoring him. So he doesn't use. Usually, maybe some of his followers, in different parts of the world. We don't know, to be honest. I can't, tell from where. It is routine call, as I said. British embassy, American embassies all over the world receive this kind of warning. And they were closed down in several Arab countries or several Arab capitals because they are afraid of reprisal. So it is something which happens, from time to time in the Middle East.
So how was it that you became aware of this warning?
Well, actually, as I said, it is always like that. Somebody, obscure person, just pick up the phone and say, definitely you are the editor of such and such a newspaper. We believe, there will be definitely something. We don't know what will happen. So it is not really clear. And so maybe because they know that I interviewed bin Laden 5 years ago, and I was maybe the only Arab journalist who got this interview, and it was publicized all over the world. So we don't know, actually. We can't tell.
But your warning goes even more specifically in your publication. You have said that Osama bin Laden would almost certainly, or is almost certainly behind the attack on the World Trade Center. What makes you so sure?
Well, to be honest, because he is the only one in the Muslim world who declared war against the United States. He considered it a Satan country. He actually issued a fatwa or Islamic ruling calling his followers to attack American interests. Maybe that's why, he is the only one who dared to say that in the Muslim and the Arab world. So if there is any connection, Middle Eastern connection with this bombing, all the fingers will point at him.
So why isn't he taking credit then? There has been no credible claim for responsibility. The Taliban insists that Osama bin Laden is being held on such a tight leash in Afghanistan that it would be impossible for him to have planned this kind of attack.
Well, to be honest, I'm a journalist. I am, analyzing things like anybody else. But, maybe because I interviewed him, I spent a week in Afghanistan, maybe, I can put pieces together and try to reach a conclusion. But Osama bin Laden never claimed responsibilities before in any attacks against the American interest. He praised the people who attacked the American embassies in Dar es Salaam and Nairobi, considered them martyrs. He also praised the people who attacked the American Marines in Saudi Arabia in 1996. He actually supported and praised the people who carried the attack against the American destroyer Cole in the seaport of Aden. So putting all these together, the man is not ashamed of saying that he is anti-American. He would like to hit American interest. So that's my conclusion. That's how I draw my conclusions.
All right, in taking a look at a broader look at other potential suspects, do you think that there is any root or any connection in the Palestinian community to these attacks on the United States?
No, I don't believe so. The Palestinian, for the last 20 years or so, they refrained from attacking anybody, and they are desperate to establish good relation with the United States. The United States is the sponsor of the peace process. They would like the American administration to, renew its interest in the peace process and to bring the two parties together, stop the bloodshed which is taking place in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. It is the interest of the Palestinians actually to win the friendship of the American people and the American administration. So I cannot see any Palestinian connection whatsoever with these kind of things.
Well, certainly Americans were disappointed and rather astonished at seeing the celebrations on the streets of Ramallah, as we're showing them once again. This on Tuesday after the attacks were announced worldwide. Palestinians have also been suspected of having some sort of cooperation, collusion, influence by the Hezbollah out of Lebanon. Is it possible that, if not a direct connection with the Palestinians in this attack, that Hezbollah could be behind these attacks?
I don't believe Hezbollah or the Palestinians are behind these attacks. Hezbollah never actually attacked American interests. The Palestinians never attacked American interests. As I said, if there are somebody who demonstrated in the streets of Ramallah, it is a very, very small minorities, and we have those minorities all over the world. You have in any nation there are criminals, there are zealots, there are extremists, there are belly dancers, all type of people. So you can't expect, we have 100%, anti-Bin Laden or anti-Islamic fundamentalism. So it is a small minority. It doesn't represent the Palestinian people. It doesn't represent the Arab people. The majority, the greater majority of Arab people were saddened and appalled and actually shocked to see innocent American killed in New York and in Washington. So, we are human beings. We understand the suffering, and really we have full sympathy with those people who were killed, with their families, and with the American people and the American nation.
Which may very well bring us back to the prime suspect here then, Osama bin Laden. The Taliban came out yesterday and said that warned the United States that if the United States or the Western alliance chooses to retaliate and attacks Afghanistan, that attack would prompt yet more terrorist attacks against Americans. Do you believe that is a credible threat by the Taliban?
Well, I believe it is credible because the American reprisal against bin Laden and Taliban 3 years ago after the bombing of the American embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam didn't prevent further attacks. And I believe, it will confirm to many Arabs and Muslims that, the Americans are targeting Muslim people and they are irrational in their reprisal. So I think the best thing is to have a civilized reprisal. I mean, to look at the roots of the problem and, try to find a political solution. And I don't mean that they shouldn't bring the responsible to people who are behind these attacks to justice. No, it is a must in this case. But, the Americans used a lot of sticks against the Arabs and Muslim countries. They used sanctions. They bombed Baghdad for about 40 days. Iraq under sanctions, Sudan under sanctions, Libya under sanctions.
The United States in those situations knows who it's going after, knows what the target is. In this particular case, when you're talking about a terrorist organization that is multinational, multilateral, and unseen, that a political solution seems far out of reach.
Well, when I said a political solution, I mean, to look to, definitely there are a lot of resentments in the Arab and Muslim world toward the American foreign policies. They feel that this foreign policies actually is anti-Arab, anti-Islamist. So I think if they look at it and try to build a friendship with the Arab countries and try to solve the poisonous point of this relation, which is the Arab-Israeli conflict, implement UN Security Council resolutions, maybe this will actually isolate extremists among the Arabs and Muslims and actually make United States and American citizens safer than ever.
That's
what I mean. But if there is any reprisal, innocent people will suffer in Afghanistan, maybe in other parts of the world. So I hope we will be rational and try to think about the consequences.
Understood. Abdelbari Atwan, thank you very much, Editor-in-Chief of Al-Quds, and certainly the Arab League is going to be critical in any decision that the United States makes. Vince?
Well, we told you earlier this hour that the 3 New York airports, LaGuardia, Kennedy, Newark, opened on a limited basis on this Thursday. We also have some more airport information to pass along. Reagan National, Washington, D.C. will not open, and there is no indication right now about Dulles and whether they will open for travel. But we can tell you that America is again waking up and moving forward, trying to get past. We have some pictures to show you. We have New York City now. Let's take a look there. Well, there we go to the Pentagon, and you can see that giant gaping hole in the southwest wall, and workers still going at it there.
That's right. It looks like a fire is still burning off to the right, but perhaps I saw something else. And also the scene there from what is left of the World Trade Center, Twin Towers there. Some 1,500 rescuers at work there, climbing through the rubble, and also very concerned about the surrounding buildings still threatening to possibly collapse. Every second counts when they're trying to save lives there. And just the smoke plume.
That's been part of the skyline now, is that the smoke billowing up again. And we've seen that for the last couple of days.
That's right. And what you don't see off the coast of New York are ships, Navy ships patrolling the coast, and F-16 still flying overhead. It is indeed the scene of what many people around the world would clearly say is a war zone.
Right. We are seeing, as we get closer to the base of the World Trade Center, they're saying 10 blocks in every direction there. Debris in the streets, cars overturned. So you can see how difficult it is to try to get in and out of that area, let alone work in the very ground zero area.
Of course, the work is going on there to try to rescue people, but work behind the scenes in our nation's capital as the U.S. Attorney General, John Ashcroft, calls the probe into Tuesday's attacks. Well, he's calling it the most massive and intensive investigation in American history. And as David Ensor is reporting now, U.S. officials apparently have already made some significant progress.
U.S. officials say on the passenger manifests of the hijacked planes used in the attacks, they found names associated with terrorist groups. Intelligence officials say the evidence still points to the al-Qaeda group, headed by Osama bin Laden.
There had to be some brains behind this. We have some good, promising leads. They're obviously being followed.
Publicly, the Bush administration is accusing no one so far, while warning nations they too will pay for any help given to those who attacked New York and Washington.
We will hold accountable those countries that provide support, that give host nation, if you can call it that, support and facilities to these kinds of terrorist groups.
Afghanistan's Taliban government has long offered haven to bin Laden, but U.S. officials say they have no evidence thus far of any state directly assisting the attacks in New York and Washington. Many analysts argue that such a coordinated broadside could not have been possible without it.
Osama bin Laden represents a complete terrorist network. He will have one or more state sponsors, countries that he's either based in or working in collusion with. There'll have been passport support, communication support.
One thing I think that ought to make us a bit suspicious about whether bin Laden was involved in it alone or not is that he goes to great lengths to advertise himself. And when you see something like that, you begin to wonder whether or not there may be an effort to draw our attention solely to him, to the neglect of someone who may be his principal contractor.
If there was state support, a number of terrorism experts point to Iraq as the most likely suspect. A statement from President Saddam Hussein on Iraqi television said, quote, "The United States reaps the thorns that its rulers have sown in the world."
U.S. officials say they are developing good law enforcement and intelligence leads. They do not know yet who was behind these attacks, nor whether any state assisted them. But they believe they soon will. David Ensor, CNN, Washington.
Well, the rescue efforts underway in New York have produced some of the most poignant images ever captured on film or tape. Here are some of those pictures.
May God bless America. You know, in the early hours of yesterday, when some of the smoke had cleared, people began taking stock of a New York changed forever. CNN's Beth Nissen shows us.
This is what New Yorkers woke up to this morning. Those who'd managed to sleep at all during a night of surreal quiet. No planes overhead, no car alarms, strangely no sirens. This morning, no traffic jams. No rush hour crowds. No 110-story buildings where two had stood yesterday. People rushed to buy up postcards, vibrant reminders of what New York City looked like on Monday.
I'm used to seeing the Twin Towers, and this morning they weren't there. And it was sad. It was just, it's just horrible.
Yesterday it was all so unreal, so distant. By today, it had hit home. So many people knew the name of someone who never called home yesterday, never came back from work. A neighbor, a friend, a brother-in-law.
This is what he looks like, and if anyone's seen anything, we'd appreciate them calling to try to help us out. The phone number is 718-432-5982, and anything that anyone can do to try to help us find him.
People who hadn't read a newspaper in months hunted down copies today, read every word, gasped at still photos that stopped the heart. It had happened. It had really happened. Slowly today, the state of stun, the disbelief, gave way. In some cases to anger. In this city of fast moves and blunt words, there were many who wanted vengeance in a New York minute.
I've always been a bleeding heart liberal, but right now I certainly feel a lot of anger, and, you know, I mean, there's a side of me that wants to see our government just go and whoever's an enemy, just hit him now and ask questions later.
But as most people began to comprehend what had happened at the World Trade Center, what had to have happened to all those people, disbelief gave way to sorrow, to great aching sadness. So many people in this city of walkers walked with their heads low today, depressed, defeated somehow. The bad guys seem to have won this time. Americans don't have much experience with defeat. New Yorkers don't ever admit it. Hundreds lined up on the West Side Highway, the main access to the attack site, to offer their support, to rally their spirits. But on the day after, just one long day, millions of New Yorkers are already so weary. New Yorkers don't wait well, and they've had to wait for the phone calls saying, "I'm fine, she's okay," or "We haven't heard from him yet." They've had to wait for hard facts. How many saved? How many lost? Who did this? And why? And today they began to realize the waiting may last weeks, months, even years. The waiting for answers, for comfort,